On a humid afternoon in Laurel, Maryland, a governor named George Wallace made the decision not to wear his bulletproof vest for a rally. It was too hot for the cumbersome armor, too bulky. Besides, the visiting Alabama governor felt safe enough behind his 800-pound armored podium, which he took on all of his presidential campaign stops. Wallace also had a security detail of over 50 county and state police, according to witnesses. An armored vest would feel like wearing a fifth wheel, so Wallace left the vest in the trunk of a state trooper's car. George Wallace was also no stranger to public threats. He was known to joke, in private, that he had been the most threatened presidential candidate in the country. This might have been because Wallace was a Democrat in Alabama, a state which has been solidly Republican since 1964. Or perhaps Wallace was under the constant threat because he was an outspoken segregationist whose inaugural speech in 1963 was written by Ku Klux Klan leader Asa Carter. Wallace said in his inaugural speech, quote, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." Still, Wallace considered himself safe. One of his bodyguards, Lieutenant Lloyd Jemison, stated, "No threats at all lately, not anything you could pin down." Meaning, Wallace had received plenty of hateful calls and a few thrown tomatoes earlier that day during another rally, but no real credible death threats. What George Wallace couldn't have known was that the young man who would try to assassinate him wasn't the type to send death threats. The man who would unload a revolver into George Wallace's abdomen at close range, hitting him 4 times and wounding 3 others, was a quiet loner. In fact, he was such a quiet loner that the pulp cultural stereotype of the dangerous recluse would be born from his attempt on Wallace's life. Governor Wallace would ultimately be paralyzed from the shooting. In later years, Wallace would beg for forgiveness for his segregationist views, from civil rights leaders no less, and he would gain the African American vote in his 1983 run for Alabama governor. But Wallace's 180-degree turn wouldn't have happened without the homicidal loner named Arthur Bremer, the man who inspired the movies Taxi Driver and Joker. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet and get to the juicy facts for us.
Today we're talking about loneliness, a condition that everyone will experience in their lifetime, but a condition few of us will admit to having. Fewer still will seek help for it. Together we're going to look at why we experience loneliness as a species, what the physical consequences of loneliness can be, and how our prison system is designed to make social isolation worse. And we're going to explore these steps you can take to lessen feelings of loneliness in your life. We're also delving into the 3 biggest myths that keep us in the dark about loneliness, myths that television and media love to spread. Myth 1, every man is an island. Badass loner cops, hardcore prisoners, and cowboys in classic Western movies never struggle with loneliness. So why would we? Are we just being emotionally needy? Are we a part of a weaker, lonelier generation? Did the heroes who stormed Normandy Beach stop for a hug afterwards? Myth 2. Prison and solitary confinement are effective punishments for violent criminals. It gives criminals time to reflect. Criminals like Arthur Bremer. The system forces them to meditate on their crimes, like monks at a monastery. After all, they just need to consider their crimes, repent, and they'll be ready to re-enter society, right? Myth 3. We've solved loneliness with social media. We're more connected than ever. So how can we feel loneliness when grandma's just a Zoom call away and we have hundreds of friends on Instagram? But first, Joe and I are going to talk about Arthur Bremer's everyday life and find out just how much Bremer had withdrawn from society.
Quick question, Todd. Have you seen the movie Joker?
I just did recently for the second time.
For the second time. Yeah. Ironically, Joker's name in that was also Arthur, so I don't know if that was an intentional connection or if it was just sort of a happy incident.
With all the names in the world, it's probably not a coincidence.
Right, it could have been on purpose. So in that movie, Joker was portrayed as being very, very lonely. Same thing with Taxi Driver, what this incident eventually inspired the movie. So my question for those two movies and for this story we're talking about with Arthur Bremer is, was that loneliness played up? Like, how lonely was Bremer really?
Well, according to, after the assassination attempt, they dig through your whole life and go back to grade school, to everyone who's ever had any contact with you. And his grade school teachers, grammar school teachers would say that he wouldn't play with the other kids. He would be off by himself. It's like he just didn't even know what to do. His next door neighbors would greet him friendly, like you do any of your neighbors, like, good morning, neighbor. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have the social skills or tact to look back at them and say, oh, good morning, or smile. He just would blankly stare at them.
So he's the creepy kid across the street, basically.
Yeah, but he didn't even know to say hi or force a smile or anything. So just kind of, I look at it like a snake, saying hi to a snake or something. He just kind of looks back at you with that dead look.
Right. Yeah, they also call that the Department of Motor Vehicles stare. When you go get your license picture taken, that's the glare they give you.
That they have nothing to live with, no hopes or dreams, or there's no love, no emotion in their life.
Right, that's the soul escaped my body stare. Yeah. So his personal surroundings kind of reflected that?
He had his first apartment, got left out of his parents' house, and he had an abusive childhood. We're not going to dive into that there. We don't have enough time to go through every minute of his life. But he didn't have any hobbies. He didn't do any sports. He didn't have certain kind of things he read. He didn't do crafts. His apartment was just littered with trash of scribbled notes, of his random thoughts, of things that he was thinking about or things he should have been interested in. He was all over the place, and it was a mess. There was no organization to it. It was just really, really a recluse.
So as a writer, if I walked into his apartment, I might feel at home seeing things scribbled on scraps of paper and red yarn connecting people.
To a crazy like you, this would probably connect up. You'd be his one and only friend.
Makes me feel slightly better.
He may not have done this if he would have had you to hang out with. Now, he got his first and only girlfriend. And they were they were very serious, and she invited him back to meet his prospective in-laws. We all know that thing where you go meet your woman's family. It's a big day, and he didn't do anything. He just stood there blankly. He didn't talk to anybody. It was Christmas time, and they were opening presents for the kids, and he didn't know to cheer when the kids would open something like you're supposed to do politely. Yay!
So he gives them the blank eye. They're all cheering for like Monopoly or Nintendo or whatever they open, and he's just
snake
glaring.
Stare, Department of Motor Vehicle stare. Yeah. So he's not representing himself well.
So the step family must love him then.
Well, they didn't sign off on them dating. She was a lot younger than him. She was 16 and he was 21. So being a shy guy, 21 years old, a lot younger girl, she'd be some interest in an older person. But the parents said, the age difference is too much. We need to get rid of this.
A little too creepy.
Yeah, and on top of him being a weirdo, probably didn't help.
Yeah, if they ever saw his apartment, they would definitely not sign off.
But they say for him emotionally, Joe, this was a really a big thing to drive. I mean, he didn't think he was ever going to get another shot at love. Being as shy as he was, the chance of him even talking or being able to open up to get a conversation started or a date is pretty unlikely.
And this is pre-internet dating, so there's
no app.
No chance.
Yeah,
no app,
you had to do it the old-fashioned way. You had to muster up the courage and walk right up to rejection.
Right. I go to reptilestaremingle.com for my dating if I want to stare at somebody's stepfamily.
I still think that's a problem with society. I have a lot of single friends, and they're handsome, they work out, they have great jobs. They can't ask a woman out without an app. And to me, it's just very, very sad. Very sad state of times.
I have to go through a Victorian app that goes through multiple third party. Would you kindly sign off of potentially considering? Yeah.
You're hiding behind these firewalls of rejection. They're not really rejecting me.
Yeah, they're rejecting the profile. Yeah.
Now, a lot of his scribbling notes, the people who he did talk to, he was in school and stuff, they said that he would make political statements, but they were all over the board. Some were conservative, some were liberal, some were Republican, some were Democrat. So he didn't really quite understand what he was doing. He was kind of grabbing at straws. He just grasped onto an idea, but he didn't realize that they didn't line up.
So he's just sort of making these statements to shock and impress people then.
From the reading the research that I did, it seemed more like he was trying to connect. He just didn't know how to do it.
Oh, okay. So for him, that was like me at work trying to talk about sports.
Yes, it's.
I think you laughed a little too much at that.
Hey, where would you start? Probably
Right.
if I started talking about writing,
Okay, there we go.
To you and your people, it'd be the same thing. He is contradicting things like he was giving a presentation at school and he was doing this thing about that he wanted to help the poor, that he thinks there should be more social groups to help the poor. But then in the exact same sentence, he says we need to bomb more North Vietnam people.
Oh,
So
wow.
It's just craziness. Arthur was painfully, chronically alone. And in America, we tend to treat loneliness as an individual, emotional problem. It feels bad, but you just have to learn to get over it, right?
So usually for these episodes in our research, I usually go for when we pick our historical subject. Each one of these episodes, we take a story from history and then we try to find the scientific reason or the reason in psychology why something works. Like why Franklin Delano was really secretly good at stress management and not necessarily being a gung-ho leader. For this one, I tried so hard to find an example of a badass loner. I went for westerns. I went for historical soldiers, like people who were truly loners and accomplished amazing things.
Yeah, the cop who says, I don't need a partner. I'd work better without one.
Right. Turns out in the 90s, when every Lethal Weapon movie was like, this cop is unhinged, like that turns out to be all of them. Like I didn't know that being a loner, being a true loner, usually you just find psychopaths. Like I could not find an example of like a badass loner that wasn't just screws loose, balls to the wall, like scratch the surface and they're just unhinged. So this is what led us to Bremer. So I want to let the audience know we really did try to find like a loner that accomplished a lot and was a true loner. They didn't have someone to go back to. And that's in history. Whenever you find badass loners, they're going home to somebody.
Yeah. That's something like Howard Hughes, but he was around people with all his business days. So then at the end but most of his life he had to team up with people.
Right, and you want to talk screws loosed with Hughes? I mean, that's the name of the game with him. I
think when you have $1 billion, you can act however you want, though.
Right,
it's not so creepy.
That's why we need to become
It's
rich
character.
so we can be crazy loners.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's what led to Bremer. Is we picked this story not because it's we're not disproving that being a loner makes you unhinged. We're proving that it in fact kind of does. So the only badass loner I could find, again, unhinged, was a guy named Hiro Onada. And the entire internet knows about this guy. He's the World War II holdout who wouldn't give up. So you can look him up. But again, if you're looking for loners that aren't unhinged, he's not the place to look. There's just a lot of interesting stories about him. So talking about Bremer, Arthur Bremer, we're talking about could being a loner have pushed him over the edge. He was already sort of bad at reacting emotionally, didn't have a lot of emotional affectation. His social life suffered because of it. So we started looking into how loneliness is classified in a clinical setting. And that led to a couple of dead ends. First off, what I could find, loneliness doesn't have a recognized clinical form, and this comes from the Psychology of the Day and the APA. Loneliness, unlike depression or anxiety, it's only really recognized in diagnosis when it impairs regular life. And that's the same as most diagnoses, is when it starts having consequences, that's when we start considering it a problem. So loneliness, just feeling it, that's such a normal part of the human condition. we don't try to classify it. We don't even consider it. We talk about it in clinical spaces. Like when you go into a shrink and you talk about your problems, loneliness just comes up. Like it's almost like saying to a doctor, "Hey, I breathe," or hey, I have this weird gut feeling like I need to put food in my belly when I'm hungry.
But
Loneliness.
It isn't bulked up with depression. It isn't like that. It's not that serious. I got to get on some pills for my loneliness.
Right.
There's no such thing as that.
There wasn't such a thing as that, and we will get into that part. We'll get into the loneliness pill. That's a teaser. So until basically this decade and the internet, loneliness was not a clinical diagnosis. So now we get into a little bit of why do we feel lonely, and according to again Psychology Today, it's a biological mechanism. So Neanderthals, we're going to go back to like early human history. We're going deep with this. It's been BC. Yeah, it's been suggested that with early man, the reason why like Neanderthals were bigger, stronger, and tougher than men, like humans by
in every
rights,
way.
Yeah, we should have been conquered by Neanderthals before we made it out of the caves.
Yeah. They didn't grunt about their feelings. They just
Right. Yeah, Neanderthals weren't in like a saber-toothed couch that they'd skinned and just lay down and let Neanderthal listen.
Tell me about yesterday's hunt. What happened?
Right. So alone. But the best guesses we have why humans basically conquered Neanderthals, we're better at socializing. Just straight up, of any creature on Earth, I mean, maybe elephants and orcas are better at it than us, but we socialized our way out of the medieval or prehistory period. We trade, we build societies, we build packs, we mated with Neanderthals. Most Northern Europeans have Neanderthal DNA in them. So that loneliness, that mechanism of loneliness where people feel compelled to go look for other people, that's so baked into the human condition that we don't diagnose it, and also it's how we won. It's how we took over the earth. So if you feel lonely, it's not a flaw. It's a integral part of our society's success. And a number of culture-wide changes. I'm gonna quote this directly from The Guardian, so it comes out sounding professional. So this is from The Guardian talking about loneliness. Quote: "A number of cultural-wide structural changes might be to blame, and that's for loneliness. More Americans live alone than ever before. Fewer of us are marrying or having children, and our average household size is shrinking." So you joked about a loneliness pill. When we get to that, that's exactly why. Is because modern society is building for loneliness.
We're getting that way. We're getting bigger houses, so we're getting our own rooms. Like we used to be, a house with 5 children was 3 bedrooms. You didn't have everyone didn't have their own bedroom, and nothing. And even in my life, my 46 years on this planet, I have noticed that talking to your neighbors is not as fashionable as it used to be. We try not to make eye contact with somebody,
right?
Even people who live real close to us, because we don't want to. Whatever. It's just we're segregating ourselves, I guess.
Right. I go into my house when my neighbors are outside, like somebody being led from court. I hold up a manila envelope in front of my face, and I have my lawyer shield me with a jacket in the back of my head.
So they can identify you and actually smile or say, I mean, what could they possibly want besides, a head? What's
exactly.
Up?
Yeah. No, I try to avoid my neighbors. So, and I suspect most people living in the internet age, they do the same.
That's the introverted you.
Right.
Go talk to them about sports, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, do you watch that game?
I'll
and pray that they didn't.
Yeah, pray they don't have questions. Yeah, I wear a blank jersey with no numbers. They don't even know what sport it represents. That's how I get by. So the next question to bring us around: why don't we treat loneliness as a real problem? Some of this isn't so much theory as just sort of like culturally accepted behavior. So historically, we ignore people who feel lonely. We kind of treat it like it's up to their support system to solve their loneliness. And one way to look at this is like prearranged marriages, of course. But also in like Western society, it's almost expected that your mother is eventually going to like say, "Hey, why don't you go out with what's her face from down the street or my bridge club?" Like Aunt Myrtle. Like they pick somebody out for you, and they start getting on your case if you don't get married or start dating. So our first mechanism against chronic loneliness is our family. Our support system will start pushing you to hook up with people.
I could see that because between girlfriends, I run back to mom and start spending more time with her working at the house, and and I'm thinking, man, that might be it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, everyone's support system, that's what we expect them to have. And if you don't have a support system, like for instance Arthur Bremer, he had a family, but they didn't want to deal with him any more than strangers did.
Yeah, and they were very unhealthy.
Right.
Yeah, he was in danger being around them.
Right. Yeah. It was more lonely being with his family than it was just living in an apartment with nobody. So if that's the case, then you really do need to seek help for loneliness, and that's when we need to treat it like it's a real problem.
It is, though. You see, you go in and tell someone you're lonely. They just first thing that pops in your head is stop feeling sorry for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though you know how real and how hard it is to be lonely, that's the first thing you think of. Go do something. Go meet somebody. Go meet some new friends.
Fix it. Yeah. And that's a good point that I want to get to too. Is the way we treat loneliness. When we see people who are loners, and if they're sort of like a confident male and they're a loner, we don't look at that as a negative. We kind of treat that like a badass thing.
Strong. Yeah.
Right. It resonates with strength.
Mm-hmm.
We go to like movies. We talk a lot about like loner cops and badasses and cowboys. Now I want to talk a little bit about that in history and in prehistory. And this comes from the University of Southern California. And they linked. Now I'm not saying everyone who's got autism is a loner. But historically, people who have autism display a lot of loner qualities. So here's what comes from the University of Southern California. Autism may have turned hunter-gatherers into badass loners. If you think of autism, they have a lot of solitary tendencies, repetitive activities, and this would be great for tracking and memorizing terrain. You think about like counting, like autism gives you like the time to count and stockpile, and that'd be great for stockpiling like resources.
So they're consistent in they're an everyday thing. They get up and do it over and over in the right order.
Right.
Yeah,
so we were talking about ancient man out socializing other species. Then you'd randomly once in a while have these dangerous solo human males wandering around. And oftentimes, if this study is to be believed, they might have just been the autistic humans who had tendencies that made them perfect solo survivors. And so think of that and then look back at our solitary loners in fiction. We have like John McClane, the cop from Die Hard, who is an absolute loner. We have like Batman from history, or not history, from comics first and then eventually movies. But these are characters that almost kind of show those tendencies. I'm not accusing Batman and John McClane of being autistic. I'm just saying Batman, there's no... Like, he opens his Batcave and he's got rows of suits. And he's got stockpiles of weapons. And he's
geeking out on something, yeah.
Yeah, he's looking at a bullet through a magnifier that's testing trajectories.
And he's so protected, he's in the basement of something where no one can get to him.
Right. So if you want to talk somebody that really almost represents the autistic, primitive loner survivor, Batman might be your guy. That might be the best sort of like analog to modern fiction. So what does chronic loneliness do to us? It doesn't turn you into a badass. I'm going to start with that. You don't become Batman. Arthur Bremer might have thought he was becoming Batman. Being a loner, if you already sort of have mental problem or deficiencies or undiagnosed clinical problems, you may think that loneliness is benefiting you.
Being a loner and then being independent, where's the line?
Right. That's a really good point.
Because we see strength in being an independent.
Yes.
Being an independent woman, being an independent man. We don't need anybody else. When everybody needs a lot of people.
Right. When you break up and you spend time alone, people say you're finding yourself.
Yeah.
Or you're
dating
discovering
you.
yourself, dating yourself. Yeah. So there is a line. So it's not to be confused with the two. That loneliness can become unhealthy, but it can also be beneficial.
I dated myself for a long time. It was a horrible relationship. It wasn't very fulfilling.
One of you did the chores, the other didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're talking chronic loneliness that lasts for years, and it's not by choice. It's not for self-help. So chronic loneliness in modern studies is linked to anxiety, depression, PTSD. This is from Psychology Today, and it can be as early as birth. It can be chronic loneliness can start even when you have a family, even when you're being cared for. Like Bremer, you can have a family around you and feel lonely.
And there's people in relationships too. That people are married. I know some of my friends are married and they're lonely. They're lonely in their own
right
in their own house, in their own skin.
Yeah, loneliness can be either you don't have contact with other people, or you're not understood by the people directly around you, and that can be a complete form of loneliness in itself.
That's a good point. They don't get you.
Yeah. Now there's a meta study by a superstar in the field of loneliness, Julianne Holt Lundstedt from BYU, and she took 148 studies, so that's over 300,000 participants, and boiled these studies down, and she was just looking for mortality, like survival rates for people who were lonely. And she found out that there was a 50% higher correlation for survival if participants had a strong social bond. So looking across all these studies, and that's consistent across sex, age, health, status. It's not a mortality problem just for lonely old cat ladies.
Yeah, and that's a big study too. It's 300K.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not one study. It's a meta study, so it's 148 studies. But that's a good way to look at it. Is it's such a big population, big sample, and it proves that we need other people. I mean, if you don't have a social connection, 50% higher rate of survival from any age. That's an incredible amount. So is it worth it becoming Batman and being a complete loner?
I like
Probably
that
not.
No.
I don't. I think maybe Batman's taking too many risks by being a complete loner.
I might want to upgrade some of the people around me, but I definitely want a lot of people around me.
Yeah.
I'll keep those ones I got until I can fill those positions.
Yeah. That's a better way to look at it. It's like employment. Could you fill out this form to be my friend?
I have to stay staffed.
Yeah, exactly. So, just one quick question for you, and people are wondering how could being alone affect my mortality? I'll just ask this question of you. When you have somebody around you, do you take better care of yourself physically?
I totally do, because it's an accountability thing. I keep my place cleaner, my car's cleaner. I use a certain kind of language that I would probably not use. I'm a little bit more up.
Yeah.
What about you?
Absolutely. If I don't have anyone checking up on me, like if I know that I can get away with it, I'm eating a pint of ice cream. And then I'm watching Netflix, and then you might find me days later with flies buzzing over me. And then eventually I'll roll out of bed to write or read an article. That's it.
I remember I went through a very depressing thing, and it probably was after a breakup, and I lived in Las Vegas, and all I did all day, I didn't shower, I was so tired. I couldn't muster up any energy.
Yeah.
And it was loneliness, and I ate the same Arby's. I remember I used just roast beef sandwiches. That's all I would eat for like a few weeks. I mean, I was just really in a dark place.
That should be the new motto for Arby's. Is feeling lonely? Here's the new roast beef sandwich. Yeah.
Really pathetic. Yeah.
So now, so the real consequences, the mortality of loneliness, and this comes from The Guardian. Loneliness elevates the risk of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, cognitive decline, immune system issues, and infections.
That pretty much covers everything.
It covers absolutely everything.
Every part of your nervous system, your heart, everything.
Yeah.
So it's not good for you to be by yourself.
No, not so much.
It's going to kill you.
You're less of a badass and more of a walking statistic if you are chronically alone.
For someone like Arthur Bremer, who had a history of antisocial behavior, could chronic loneliness have pushed him over the edge? It absolutely could. Him and all other quote unquote creeps in our society that we sometimes, rightly, don't want to come in contact with. But if we all push people like Bremer to their margins to save ourselves the trouble, sometimes we get killers.
So when Arthur Bremer was sentenced, going back to your story, how did he plead? Because I'm dying to know.
Well, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay.
Which, given his final statement after sentencing, he felt like he was crazy. He felt like he was insane. The judge invited him to make a statement.
Oh, good. I have that statement here. So do you want to hear it?
Share it with me, please.
Yeah. When the judge asked him if he wanted to make a statement, oh boy, did he. So earlier, apparently, in the sentencing, the prosecutor told the judge and the jury that he, the prosecutor, wished that he had been protected by society from somebody like Arthur. Like he was basically knocking Arthur down a peg.
This guy's dangerous to all of us. We need him off the streets.
Right. He said, I wish we'd been protected by from somebody like you. And Arthur, in return, in his statement, said, quote, while pointing at the prosecutor, he said, quote, "He'd like society to be protected from someone like me. Looking back on my life, I would have liked it if society had protected me from myself. That's all I've got to say."
That's the telling statement that I've been living in my own personal hell. I'm
Right.
afraid of my own self. I'm afraid of what I'm going to do. I don't even know what I'm going to do.
Right. The prosecutor and jury had to live with him for all of a couple of days. Arthur had to live with himself for much longer.
Well, when you shoot 4 people in front of hundreds or thousands of people, it doesn't take long for the jury to come back. They were only away for 95 minutes. The jury believed, and it was painted that he did it all just for the fame, for the notoriety of it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this was later confirmed in his journal, which was found about a year later. This kind of brings back to Taxi Driver, where he wanted to do something, be significant. Wrapped in foil and taped inside a plastic briefcase, buried in a viaduct in Milwaukee. So he had a plan. It was premeditated. He wasn't just insane. He'd been planning to do this.
So he dropped this thing in the ground like it was buried treasure.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, it's always a good sign when somebody's writing a manifesto. I mean, that means there was intent, right?
Yeah. You see those movies where they have a list of people. The crazy person has a list of people they're going to kill. Or everyone that was mean to them their whole life from middle school on.
Right. Yeah, like,
and they check them off. You see your name's next. You're like, shit.
Arya Stark's assassination list. He's got names.
So he was sentenced. He was obviously guilty, and they found him not insane. So they sent him to a regular prison. He was sentenced to 63 years. So when you're in your early 20s, that's a life sentence. There was some kind of problem with his sentencing, so it got reduced on appeal to 53 years, which
still a long time.
Yeah, you're off the streets. You're less likely to hurt someone when you're 70 than when you're 20.
I read an interesting thing about Bremer, about when he went in. So after his sentencing, I just anecdotally found a little tidbit that talked about how he got in, and pretty much immediately in 72, so that's the next year, he started a fight in prison, and he was put in the hole for 30 days.
He picked a fight. Without a gun, just his fist, huh?
Right, yeah. I probably didn't write a manifesto first and then started a fight. And then again in 73, he spent another month in prison. Or in solitary in prison, and that probably doesn't seem like months that much, but it's a 1/12 of your year. So that led me to the question. Since we're specifically talking about loneliness, it was kind of lucky finding that, because I wanted to know what true loneliness does to somebody. Like what does it look like when you put somebody in a box with a very small window? And what happens when you force them to occupy their mind without anyone to bounce things off of?
I think they either get better or they get worse.
Oh yeah, they get worse.
It's not the better ones.
Spoiler.
That's optimistic.
Everything I looked into,
Or else we wouldn't be talking about it.
Right. if in the research it had said isolation and solitude is great, do it. We'd be having a different conversation. That would have been safe for another episode. We would be reading from an episode that says how solitary can give you meditational superpowers.
It's really, really cheap. You can do it at home.
Yeah. Here's the retreat everyone in Silicon Valley is doing, and it just looks like a cell. Yeah, that is not the case. So one research piece I found was about a man named Robert King. So we're going off subject slightly. This is not Bremer. This is a completely different inmate. He was an inmate who was kept in solitary for 29 years. And he shared when he got out with neuroscientists what had happened to him.
It's like a lifetime. 29 years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is such a long time. It was, I mean, for lack of a better word, that's just straight up cruelty. That you're not treating somebody like a human at that point.
And we're 2 months into quarantine, which by no means is solitary confinement.
Right.
And we know how hard that is.
Yeah. Before the marches and the protests, there was actually a protest just for Corona and quarantine. That was in Michigan. So after a couple of weeks of quarantine, people are ready to throw rocks at cars and go to the state capitol with guns. So,
not 29 years.
Not 29 years, exactly. So he came out and he talked about how, well, the first trouble he had was he had trouble recognizing faces. So he would see people and he'd see people again and again, and it took a while for him to recognize their face and to associate it with a personality.
Oh, wow.
He had trouble following simple directions. He would be given routes and directions to move through the city, and he couldn't follow it. His brain had effectively erased normal abilities that normally would require spatial recognition and social recognition. And those just, since he wasn't using them, his brain just kind of etch-a-sketch erased them, like they shook out.
His brain was deteriorating. He couldn't do basic functions.
Yeah. His brain started removing parts that weren't used, and that holds up to science. Like we have known for a long time that if you don't use an ability, like a spatial ability or social ability, your brain lets it atrophy.
It gets duller, and then it just doesn't need it anymore because you're not using it.
Yeah, it's not so much a problem of your brain getting duller. It's just that it trims, it prunes away unnecessary paths. And if those unnecessary paths are social or spatial, those get pruned. So they tested in rats isolation. They've isolated these poor rats, and they would do it for multiple months. They basically replicate isolation like a cell, like putting somebody in solitary. And they found out for the first month of isolation, their brains created extra branching neurons. So it overcame the isolation by basically giving them sort of like these, we don't know because we couldn't talk to the rats, but people who'd spend time in solitary, they talk about that first month. They talk about how their daydream takes over and their mind goes to places. So what that might be doing is, like these rats, their brains might be creating extra branching neurons to compensate. And for the first month, their total neuron volume at first decreases by 20%. And scientists believe that initial branching, that daydreaming period, was a defense mechanism for the brain. And that, I'm going to tell you about a little Joe theory of mine. This part isn't upheld by science, but I'm starting to believe that that's what mindfulness retreats are. When people go out to meditate, or they
explain what you mean.
Yeah. If you or I pay for a retreat where we don't talk and we don't make eye contact with other people, like we go to these mindfulness retreats. Mm-hmm. That's effectively emulating isolation. And we know people who go out to the desert and isolate themselves. There are CEOs in Silicon Valley that's like their number one way to decompress.
These 10 grand yoga weeks.
Yeah. They go out and they
Namaste.
They find a tent somewhere and they isolate for a month or weeks. So for the first month, it would make you decompress. If you're going through this daydream period, this extra branching neurons period, that makes sense that it'd be temporarily beneficial. But after
you start
initial
losing
30
stuff you
days-
need back at work and in life.
right. After the first 30 days, that's when we start getting into the trimming period. So when we start getting into that, where we start losing function, that's where that's where your meditation period has gone too far, and that upholds too. Most meditation periods don't last a month. So when we imprison people, or if we put them in solitary to reform them, I'm starting to be convinced that we're less doing it to make them adapt to society. We're more just doing it because we're scared of them and we don't want to see them. And this does not make them better at socializing. In fact,
they're
it's
taking
trimming
people.
that out.
They're taking people who already have social problems and putting them all together. People who can't behave on the outside, they all go inside and expect to get better. It doesn't make any sense.
Right, and once on the inside, if you perform badly, we isolate you even further. We put you in social, in solitary.
It's like taking your kid who's already a behavior problem and finding a group of kids that are worse behaved, who've been suspended or expelled, and say, "I need you guys to start hanging up, have a little meetup group."
Yes,
it's only going to get worse.
And when they come out, we ask, "Why aren't you better?"
Yeah. Hang out with tougher meter kids and see if they're going to get nicer and smarter. It's not going to happen.
Why are you still a bully? Have you ever seen pictures of Swedish prisons online?
No.
Oh my God! Please look.
Tell me about them. What are they?
If you get a chance, Swedish prisons are amazing. While I was doing this research, I had seen pictures anecdotally before. They look like apartments. They look better than like my apartment.
It's like a timeshare condo.
Yeah, it's like a nice bed, books, regular like windows and things.
So I'm guessing you're saying they treat people better.
They are, yeah.
The living conditions and their socialization.
So, they're not isolated. They can talk to each other. They're treated. If you look into it, it sounds. I know the argument why we don't do that here. It's the cost. We like to run things more efficiently in the U.S., and we like to imprison at a higher rate, and you simply can't give everybody in prison an apartment because, historically, Americans don't like to spend extra money on people who aren't earners. Like that's capitalism in a nutshell. If you aren't personally a breadwinner, we would rather you be as efficiently taken care of as possible in all segments, not just prisons. So if you look at a Swedish prison, it looks like an apartment, and you're given time out and time to socialize, time to exercise, and they have a 40% recidivism rate. So 40% of the people that come out, they end up doing crimes and going back to prison in total. American prisons have, according to the Department of Justice, so this is fairly accurate, 83% recidivism rate.
Over twice as much.
And here's the killer. American prisons, so Swedish prisons have a 40% recidivism rate in total. Ours is 44% within the first year.
So they're out and they're right back.
Right. So we don't just train people by isolating them to come back. We train them to come back right away.
Yeah. Just like in his pre-prison life, Arthur Bremer had only one friend. He had a girlfriend, but he had one friend. And the guy's name was Thomas Newman. Now, society's hoping that if this wouldn't have happened to somebody, if they would, that one person they could latch on to. But his one friend that he had in the world, his one girlfriend breaks up with him.
Okay.
His one friend commits suicide. And it's in a horrible way, Joe. His friend Thomas was with his little sister, and he was playing Russian roulette. And he said
with a real gun.
With a real gun. And said to his little sister, "You want to check this out?" And then he blew his brains out right in front of her. So she's here somewhere. Hopefully she's still alive, and hopefully she's still adjusted. Yeah, so for him, he has his one friend that kills himself. His one girlfriend breaks up with him. And being as shy and being as antisocial as he is, it's not likely he's going to get a lot more opportunities. He also, and you talked earlier about all his scribble pads that were in his apartment. So they, the detectives.
His only friend at this point was pads of paper.
Well, what he was doing is he's taking notes and trying to figure stuff out. Like talked about earlier, how he couldn't figure out if he was a Democrat or Republican, conservative, liberal. He was writing notes about different hairstyles and different clothes he could buy, and he was writing things down to try to get people to impress him. He didn't know what direction to go. So he knew at his core that he needed some people, he needed a connection, some kind of emotional connection.
Oh, that is tragic. Wow. When you talked scratch pads before, I just thought like he was planning and plotting, but
Yeah.
taking down like that's pre-internet version of going to Reddit for help, like for clothes and stuff. That's sad.
Just through doing all this research, I'm not real sympathetic about the guy because to me he comes off as a real prick.
Yeah.
He's arrogant and he wanted to be famous, and I'm giving a teaser for what happened later in his life, which kind of solidifies my opinion on. Not that I'm judging, I'm not perfect, but
yeah.
How many friends does it take for us to be sane? If Arthur would have had that one friend, do you think he would have kept him from pulling the trigger?
One guy to say, I don't know about this.
Right, someone to talk to, run it off of. When you're building up and you're building momentum, say, whoa, this is a bad idea. Maybe we shouldn't rob the bank. And what does it take? Is it one friend? Is it 5 friends? Is it 100 Facebook friends? Is it 1,000 Twitter followers? What does it take?
So that's a good question. And we teased at the beginning that one of the big myths we were going to go after is, did social media cure loneliness? And the answer, to sort of spoil the tension, is no, of course it didn't. I'm going to quote Dr. Jeremy Nobel from the Harvard Health. He says, quote, "Asking if social media makes you lonely and depressed is a little like asking if eating makes you fat. The answer is yes, absolutely, but not always, not in everyone, and not forever." Social media.
How can that be though? If you have connect with all these people from your whole life, right?
Right.
In theory, it should be the opposite. You feel connected. You know what's going. You're updated on everybody, how they feel and what they're doing, and right.
Right, like my friends are like a Seinfeld episode. Like I want to know what's been going on in the background and who's with who, and Nobel says social media is fine in moderation, and like we're talking about, like you said, if you're just checking to keep up with friends and family, and to know what's going on, then it's perfectly fine. The problem is, as he puts it, it's a diet that tilts heavily toward food that's lacking in nutritional value. He compares social media to food. And social media is the sweets and junk food of your social needs.
Because we love it even though it's bad for us.
We love it, it's bad for us, and it doesn't fulfill us.
But we keep doing it.
But we keep doing it because it's great junk food. Yeah, the Twitter is like a chip. Like you go on, you get that temporary, like a little bit of fulfillment, a little bit of taste, and it tastes good, but it doesn't actually give us any nutrition. So if you think of Facebook and Twitter as supplementing your interpersonal engagements, then it's healthier. If you think of it like that, like you're getting most of your socializing from other people, from people you know in real life, real interpersonal relationships. You're getting advice from people. You're seeing people on an everyday basis. You're making friends, and then Facebook time and Twitter time is just a little bit of a supplement on top. It's the snack.
Much like bad diet and stuff, though, Joe. For me, it's either I do it at all the time, like I can't stop checking the feed and liking people's things and commenting and messaging people, or I just have to stay off it altogether. There's no 20-minute time limit. It's the way my personality is, or what? I don't know what you call it.
It's much the same with me. My social media engagement is I look for interesting, fun facts and goofy, like little fun memes. And then I will get distracted by somebody who is arguing, and then I can't stop. Then it becomes it's like consuming an entire bag of potato chips. I will just be staring at these social arguments for hours and hours.
Well, it makes me, if I'm lonely and depressed, which a good part of my adult life has been, Facebook makes me makes me suicidal because I see all these people who have better jobs than me, have better spouses, have cute kids, and everything's better. They
just
makes me feel like
lonely.
garbage.
Yeah. I wish Facebook forced you to post every couple of hours you had to post how you actually felt right then. So for everyone on Facebook, they look like a yogurt commercial or like an antidepressant commercial. Everyone's on a bicycle and they all are smiling. I want the post where somebody is like, they look like garbage. They're laying on a couch and they're watching old episodes of Law and Order that they don't even want to see. Like that's.
Well, let me break that down. I have a good example of that.
Sure.
In the good old days, you would go out and you'd buy a roll of film in a regular camera, and you would take the pictures and you would take it to one of these drive-through things where they would process it. So you wouldn't get the pictures back or even see the pictures until you got them months later. And every one of the listeners who remembers this will tell me, only 1 out of 20 pictures was a good picture. One of them, your eyes were closed, you know what I mean? So you couldn't edit them on the spot, right? So that's how life really is, I think. 1 out of 20 is a positive.
That's a fantastic metaphor. The rest are blurry, you're not at your best, and life is fairly normal. And that should be the representation. So here's what we're looking at. How do we cure that loneliness? So you talk about, I feel like that 19 out of 20 most of the time, where I'm barely getting my social needs met or it's overload. There's no real in between. So how do we cure loneliness, chronic loneliness? Well, one way to do it is they're developing a pill. So you joked about that earlier, and I said, just wait.
I was only joking.
So I found this in The Guardian. There's a pill called pregnenolone, which improves stress disorders and eases hypervigilance in the brain. So hypervigilance is a form or related to PTSD, and its design is to make stresses less and hypervigilance less. They've also tested beta blockers, which are used for heart medications to lower adrenaline. And the concept behind these is that they're being tested not to end loneliness. They don't make you feel like somebody else is around. It's not a drug to stop the feeling. It removes the negative effects and the strain.
So your stress declining.
Yeah.
The physical stress, that stress that they can,
right.
Not the mental strain and the.
Yeah, we talked about the cognitive decline and the stress and the lowering your health. These kind of drugs would just be to stop the negative backslide. Another way to deal with loneliness, because we're not going to have these pills for a while, or if we do, we don't have a regimen for it quite yet. We're barely even diagnosing loneliness. So the other way to do it, and again, this comes from The Guardian, is to cure it yourself. There are steps you can take to lower the impact of loneliness. And the article, if you want to go look it up, it's really good. If you're feeling alone, this is a great article to check out. It's 7 ways to overcome loneliness. And it's in their mental health section. And I'm only going to read like 3 or 4 of these, the major ones that really hit home with me. First is recognize the need and the impact of loneliness in your life. And we talked a little bit about that. It's, do you feel alone because you're lacking connections? Do you feel alone because you don't actually have somebody to talk about? And you mentioned, do you feel alone because somebody's not listening? How often are you surrounded by people, but no one actually understands you? They're not cognitively getting what you're saying. Here's another one. It's to increase meaningful social contact. So prioritize family and friends over strangers. We can feel alone in life because all we have is ancillary or lower social connections. Not lower, but fleeting social connections. You say hi to your neighbor, you wave at the mailman, you chat with the guy at the store, but you don't actually talk in a meaningful, lasting way with friends and family.
Do activities together, be part of their life, they be part of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like just a Facebook friend. It really doesn't. It's as deep as a puddle. It's shallow. It's not.
Right. These fleeting connections. We want to focus on lasting social connections where you have that deep, meaningful conversation. And then another way to tackle loneliness is to change your way of thinking. So therapy definitely helps. considering values, recognize why you want social connection, what kind of contact you need, what quality of contact you want, if you're looking for romantic contact versus intellectual contact. So really just examining your needs.
Do you think you need a well-rounded part of it, or can you just latch on one depending on your personality type?
See, that's a good question. I've wondered this myself, and I could not find a lot of data to back this up. The question I had is, can you get by with one friend? Like with this article, we have talked so much about Arthur Bremer only having one connection, and would that have been enough to save him? I'm starting to think maybe yes. If you have one really good connection and they're there for you and you can bounce a lot of ideas off of.
Well, I'll give you an example of that. And we've all know this. We all have that friend that when they get their girlfriend, they're gone.
Yeah.
And then when he breaks up with them, they're back. And then that's how it is. With me and my family, it was like that. I get really into family when I don't have a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, it can be good social connections that you think are going to be there forever. They get a girlfriend, it's like they got the one ring, like they go invisible and they're just gone.
They won't return your call if you had a winning lottery ticket. They wouldn't pick up your call.
Yeah, I want to share with you a really brief anecdote about trees. This is going to sound like it's unhelpful and wildly weird.
This thing's off. Are you rambling?
I'm rambling. In a long podcast, I'm taking a moment to ramble. But there's trees network with each other through Amanita fungus. So like the healthiest tree in a grove usually is not the one that's in the prime spot. There's like one tree that's by water, it gets the most sunlight, has the best fertilizer,
best soil.
You know, it should be the healthiest, strongest, largest tree. It's not. The healthiest, largest, strongest tree is the tree that's in the middle of the network. It's got the most connections, and thus it can trade the most resources at any given moment. So
I see the connection here.
Yeah.
It's like a good speech.
I've actually given well, it was mostly strictly about Amanita fungus, but I have talked about this before. So, but I think humans are much the same in their social connections. You don't want to just rely on one person, and if they get a girlfriend, then all your social connections are lost. Or if they, I hate to say it, play Russian roulette one time, and then suddenly all your social connections are lost. You do want to be rounded in your connections.
Well, I can see it just being staffed, because then you're in that that desperate situation where you need someone to fill that void, right? But it's hard. It's hard in life to stay balanced. It's not easy.
I don't mean this as an insult in any way, but I would love to see the resume to be your friend. What are the requirements? That would be an amazing resume to fill out.
Yeah, you made it. You barely made it in. Trust me. I made a few exceptions to let you in. You were underqualified.
there was a cut, and there was a trial period. I was an intern friend for a while.
Arthur Bremer was released in 2007. And to this day, he's still alive, and he's still alone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he got out of jail early. They shaved, at this time, this is before Reagan got get off, they didn't let anybody out of prison early if you had done an assassination attempt. You were pretty much gone for life. But he had kind of been such a recluse in jail that he got 16 years shaved off his sentence.
Oh, so his reclusiveness was seen as good behavior.
He got in a little trouble earlier with the fights, but then after that, so he gets out. He's a little past middle aged. He's not that skinny, bright, peppy kid, any cocky kid anymore. He's just a middle aged, looking like everybody else.
So like the Joker got fat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now he's estranged from all of his family. He has a brother that's still alive, but the brother wouldn't allow him to stay with him. So he's still totally alone.
Oh, geez. Wow.
Now, the thing that really got to me was when he got out, the governors we talked about reached out to him and forgave him. And the governor passed away. You know, he changed his whole life around, went from being a segregist racist to being a supportive, lover of all, which is amazing.
And willing to forgive Bremer.
Yeah.
So fire and brimstone governor, and then he forgives his assassin that paralyzes him.
I don't know if I could do that, right? I mean, could you forgive the person who paralyzed you?
I don't know if I'd have that in me.
So, the governor died in 1998. He had written letters forgiving him and written letters reaching out to comfort Arthur in jail. And Arthur didn't respond to any of them.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No. And he never even responded. The family members reached out to him too, and he never responded to them. He said they weren't famous enough.
Wait, his family wasn't famous enough?
Exactly.
That's incredible.
So he didn't have any sense of, of guilt or...
Wow.
As human beings, we are built to be social. We have need for approval and love and deep, meaningful interaction. When we don't get it, our health, our mental faculties decline, or we lash out like Arthur Bremer. And yet, as a society, we use loneliness as a weapon against each other. We routinely push people we find unsettling or strange to the margins. We use isolation to punish criminals, compounding any violent tendencies they might have had. We romanticize loners because they represent primitive confidence. And we hang social media like a poster over the hole that is social isolation. What would our world look like if we were able to admit that we were lonely? How would our health system change if we recognized the health dangers and the consequences of chronic loneliness? Would you change your habits, your behaviors, if you could identify your exact social needs? If we could leave you today with one gift, a tool to help re-engineer a better you, it would be this. Forgive yourself of this basic vulnerability, the feeling of loneliness and the need for social interaction. See loneliness for what it is, nature's way of telling you that you have the need for connection. Identify the exact need, whether that's calling your mother, connecting with someone romantically, or being intellectually understood. And go out and get that need fulfilled in a healthy, meaningful way. Thank you for listening to The Re-Engineer You. If you like the show, tell a friend.
And you can connect with us at the reengineeredyou.com. That's www.re-engineeredyou.com. There we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we have an opinion on everything.